Okay guys, so now we're getting into the Great Depression and the New Deal. The first thing we're going to go over is how the Great Depression begins, right? What caused the Great Depression? And the first thing is going to be overproduction. After World War I, farmers were producing at the same rate, right? Whenever we're at war, production has to be up since we're going to have more people working and more people overseas. So overproduction is when you produce more than what you can sell. So if you can't sell, then you're not making any money, and if you're not making any money, you can't pay your bills. So overproduction is one of the causes. The next one will be speculation, which is one we saw during the 1920s. And it's almost like buying on margin, where you're putting a down payment on stocks. The whole idea of buying now and pay later, right? So it's either buying on credit, buying on margin, or speculation. But speculation is more geared towards stocks. You have a shaky banking system also, and then you have restricted international trade. Remember, we were becoming isolationist and we did not want any thing to deal with other countries. So you have higher tariffs were created, which is less world trade. Now the stock market crashes in 1929. October 29, 1929 is known as Black Tuesday. The spark of it is when prices would go down, private bankers would buy stocks to keep them up. When bankers no longer invested in the stock market, it crashed. So here you can see how it was very shaky. You can see it going up in the 1920s, and at the very end it just keeps crashing, crashing, and crashing, and the ultimate low is going to be in 1932. Now, how does a depression begin? Well, first, when you create your business, well, you have to borrow money from a bank, right? So when you create a business, you hire workers. When you hire workers, the economy grows. When the economy grows, you look into creating your own company, so you borrow money from a bank, you create your own business. So it's a circle, right? It's a cycle. Then there is a backward spiral. Whenever you can't pay your workers because you're not making any money, you can't create your business, so it shuts down. People can't borrow money from the banks anymore because there is no money there, and so on and so forth. So again, the circle going clockwise is going to create a good economy. When it goes in reverse, that is a depression, and that is what we saw in the 1930s. Now, the human impact of depression in the 1920s, you have the buildup of material wealth. We saw the 1920s where people wanted, the best and finest things, the new technologies, and they were buying a lot of things on credit, money that they didn't have. Businesses failed, so farmers lost their jobs or farms, banks failed, and millions were out of work. No unemployment insurance or bank deposit insurance, right? Let's say I have my savings in a bank, and the bank is going to use my savings to lend to another person. So when that person cannot pay that money back, then can the bank pay me back? No, because the bank is not insured, and I'm not insured, so all the money I invested, all my savings are also gone. Homelessness and hunger struck the nation, and soup kitchens fed most. Now you're also going to have another problem, and it's known as the Dust Bowl. This is what we'll be going over in class more into detail. In the 1930s, it was a natural disaster. Droughts struck the nation, right? A drought is when there's no water, right? There's no rain, you have a drought, crops dry out. Heavy winds carried topsoil across hundreds of miles. Now when you overfarm a land, it's going to create like a soft soil. So now you're going to have heavy winds come through, and it's going to toss that soil up into the air, creating this horrible, horrible condition. Now the Dust Bowl is going to affect most of North Texas into Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. But there were dust storms all the way into Montana and into the lower part of Texas. Farmers abandoned their farms and they moved west. Now these are going to be known as Okies, right? And these are the kind of storms that you had. Now sometimes in Laredo you will have storms like this, but it's not this bad. Okay, those would be the dust. That's the Dust Bowl and the dust storms, the effects of them. And then you have Mexican repatriation. There is no restrictions on Mexicans coming into America, right? With the Immigration Acts in the 1920s, we restricted immigrants coming in from Asia and Europe, but none from Mexico. So they also faced prejudice and discrimination, especially when jobs were less and less. It became difficult for Mexicans to get jobs, or Americans to get jobs, so the people they would blame would be the Mexicans. So they asked them to go back to Mexico. And you're going to have discrimination just like we saw with African Americans. We serve whites only, no Spanish or Mexicans. Now, repatriation is to send Mexicans back to Mexico, so you're going to see that a lot during the Great Depression. So it says Mexicans keep going, we can't take care of our own, right? So don't stop here, we got to keep you going. So that's Mexican repatriation, and we'll be going over that more into detail in class. If you have any questions, make sure you let me know. And the last thing here, Hoover fails to halt the Depression. Now we know that in 1928, Herbert Hoover becomes our president. So when Herbert Hoover becomes the president, and remember, he had this idea that poverty will end. Obviously, it didn't, because the next year you have the stock market crash and the Depression, of course. So he tried to do too little, too late. Hoovervilles were set up, and these are shacks named after President Herbert Hoover. We know that as soon as something bad happens, we're blaming the president. Alright, so of course we're going to have another president come in and create his programs and policies, and that's going to be FDR. So, if you have any questions on the causes of the Great Depression, let me know.